With that, I'd love to introduce Steve Mister. So I first met Steve Mister the last time I was president, and he was president of president of A&P, and he was president of CRN then. So as far as formal introductions, he's been president and CEO of CRN, which is Council for Responsible Nutrition, which is the leading trade association for the dietary supplement industry since '05. Under Steve's leadership, CRN's launched initiatives towards consumer education and also industry responsibility. CRN's helped to enact adverse event reporting requirements for dietary supplements, something called the Design Anabolic Steroid Control Act, and also defeating several efforts in Congress which would have overregulated and limited consumer access to dietary supplements. Steve's led CRN to launch the Supplement Owl, an industry-run online registry for supplements and their labels. He's a member of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Association Committee of 100, certified CAE account executive, and also active in the ASAE. In addition to Steve's role as president and CEO of CRN, he's also president of the CRN Foundation that houses several of the association's consumer education and self-regulatory programs. Among the foundation's achievements are the creation of a highly successful consumer wellness education campaign called Life Supplemented, with the National Advertising Division of a program within the National Advertising Division of the Council of Better Business Bureaus to review supplement advertising, and also an economic report on cost savings for targeted specific use of dietary supplements by Frost and Sullivan. So Steve also serves, there's more. Steve also serves on the steering committee of the Dietary Supplement Quality Collaborative, and has been vice chair of the International Alliance of Dietary Supplement Associations in the past. So prior to coming to CRN, Steve served in several legal and legislative roles as Consumer Healthcare Products Association, completing a tenure as vice president and associate general counsel. Steve also worked as an attorney in Washington, D.C. At Wiley, Ryan, and Fielding in general litigation, government ethics, and federal election law, and had a stint in Capitol Hill as a media relations assistant for former U.S. Senator Charles McMathis Jr. So all this said, I can say I've had the opportunity to work with Steve the last time I was president a decade ago, and again, since last year during my current stint, I've really been impressed how Steve is so committed to making sure our patients continue to have access to dietary supplements, but also being very attentive to increasing industry responsibility. So please welcome a friend to IHPC, Steve Mister.
Well, thank you, Kazra, for that abundant, we'll call it abundant introduction. I'm humbled by it, but I'm also a little intimidated because I don't think I can possibly live up to all of that. So thank you for all of that and for having me here. So I think we're going to just jump right in. Is that right? I know we're running a little bit ahead of schedule, but I was asked to come and talk to this group today about an effort that we're working on Capitol Hill that would expand the use of flex spending accounts and healthcare savings accounts to include dietary supplements. And I think as we get into this, you'll understand why it's an important issue, not just for the industry, but for practitioners in the field, and then as well as retailers and consumers themselves to have more access to these products. So with that in mind, I'm going to go ahead and launch. I have a slide deck that I'm going to kind of walk through, and if I can master the technology, this will all work seamlessly. If not, I'll apologize up front that it's not working. Are you seeing my slides?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Excellent. So then let's jump into again this tax treatment of dietary supplements and why we think it's such an important issue for lots of different reasons. So just real quick, who we are. Kazra's done a very, as I said, abundant job of explaining who CRN is. For those of you who may not be familiar with CRN, we are the trade association for the supplement industry. We're based here in Washington, D.C. We have a staff of 19 that includes naturopathic physician, several PhD toxicologists, 3 attorneys on staff, we have a lobbying team, we have a public affairs and media team. So we really do provide sort of full service to the industry, both in terms of being an advocate for the industry, but also in terms of helping them understand their compliance obligations, and even going beyond what's required to develop a whole catalog of voluntary programs that this industry does to make sure that our members are always putting their consumers first and foremost. So that's who we are. Now let's get into the topic. We'll do a little bit of level setting just right off the bat to make sure everybody understands, because when here in Washington, we are very known for our acronyms: FSAs, HSAs, HRAs. Flex spending accounts, many of you probably have yourselves. These are the most used of the three. And these are accounts where you, through your employer, are able to put pre-tax money aside. And then when you incur medical expenses, you can tap into that money on a pre-tax basis to pay for all kinds of expenses. The second is health savings accounts. These are a little bit less familiar to people. They tend to be similar to FSAs, but are more often used where people have, for instance, a high deductible healthcare plan. And so they're going to have more out-of-pocket expenses for their healthcare, but it likewise allows them to put money away pre-tax and then to tap into it. One of the differences with a health savings account is that that money does roll over from year to year and it can build up over time. So as compared to flex spending accounts, for those of you who have an FSA, you know that every year in December, you start getting notices how much is left in your account. You better use it up or that balance is going to disappear after the first of the year. And so then people run out and buy lots of things at the end of the year to try to use up that money that hasn't been spent yet, because it does go away every year. And then the least of the three areas are called health reimbursement arrangements. Again, these are different than the other two because they're actually funded by the employer, where the employer is putting the money aside, but also pre-tax. And then employees can tap into that for medical expenses. So the big difference with an HRA versus the first two is that it's your employer's money that's being put away as opposed to the employee's money that's being put away. But so that's what we're talking about. So all three of these programs allow consumers to put this money away pre-tax and then to use it for something called a qualified medical expense. So what are qualified medical expenses? Well, they're defined very particularly by the Internal Revenue Code, includes the cost of diagnosis, cure, mitigation, treatment, and prevention of disease. It goes on. But the second paragraph at the bottom, I think, is the more important. Medical care expenses must be primarily to alleviate or prevent a physical or mental disability or illness. They don't include expenses that are merely beneficial to general health, such as vitamins or a vacation. It's a little ironic to me that dietary supplements are just being equated with having the same value as taking a week's vacation at the beach. But nevertheless, that's what the law says. That's the hand that we've been dealt. And when you dig a little bit further and you get into some of the IRS regulations and their guidance documents, it is very specific as to, are nutritional supplements a medical expense? And the IRS says yes, but only if the supplements are recommended by a medical practitioner as a treatment for a specific medical condition diagnosed by a physician. Otherwise, the cost of nutritional supplements are not a medical expense. So that is the current state of the law. How that works is that there is a private non-governmental organization called CGIS. It stands for the Special Interest Group for IIAS standards. They do a lot of standard setting, but one of the many things that CGIS does is that they do issue a list of what they consider to be qualified medical expenses. And if you're not on the list, then retailers, when somebody checks out at the store, those would not qualify. If you're fortunate to have like an FSA program where you have your own credit card that can be used for FSA purchases, if you try to buy something that's not on the qualified list, the cash register locks up and says you have to pay for it with cash. You can't use your credit card for that. the only dietary supplements that have really universally been recognized across the board as eligible under these programs are prenatal vitamins and now glucosamine. For some reason, CGIS has recognized that glucosamine does treat a medical condition like arthritis, which I won't disagree with, but there are lots of other supplements that I think that you could equate to that. But nevertheless, the only two that are widely recognized are those two. It's interesting if you go on some of these websites like the HSA store, occasionally you will see other things being covered. For instance, I was on one of these websites yesterday, and they were saying that you could use your HSA, FSA money for electrolyte replacement. But technically, if you look at the CGIS list, they are not on the list, and I think that could be problematic. So what about any other supplements? Well, if you wanted to have any other supplement covered under these programs, the patient would have to get a letter of medical necessity from a healthcare practitioner in order to have that product qualify as eligible. And that usually means getting just something from your doctor that says that the doctor believes that you would benefit from the use of the supplement, and the doctor is specifically prescribing, I put that in air quotes, prescribing that you should use the product. And then, of course, you'd have to provide that letter to your HSA or FSA administrator in order to get that covered. But even there, it's not as easy as you might think, because about 4 or 5 months ago, the IRS announced that it was going to be cracking down on what they called letter of medical necessity mills. And they said there are retailers out there who are selling gym equipment or supplements or other kinds of aids, and then just offering these letters of medical necessity on a blanket basis without actually having an individualized consultation with the patient, and that is not permitted. So we've seen some headlines since then, as you can see on the screen, where there is some indication that the IRS plans to crack down on that and plans to really look at maybe spot checking letters of medical necessity to be sure that they are in fact from a real practitioner who actually has a consultation with the patient. So all of that is by way of prelude to what we are doing today, which is is there a way that we can get dietary supplements included in these programs? And of course, the big question when you start talking about that is, how much is it going to cost? So you have to keep score of what that would add to the national deficit if you were to include these programs. And so, it's important to step back and remember that this is not government money. This is, either private individuals as employees putting their own money away, or in the case of an HRA, it's the employer putting its money away on behalf of the consumer. It is not taxpayer money, as if like you were trying to get, dietary supplements included under a SNAP benefit or a WIC benefit or something like that. But it does cost the government money. So, the example I give on the screen is if you have a worker who's in the 33% tax bracket, and so normally their entire taxable wages would be, taxed at 33%. If they put $3,000 away in an HSA or an FSA in a given year, basically the government cannot tax that money. So they are losing the 33% of that, or $1,000 that they are no longer able to receive back in taxes. So it does have some impact on the federal government when people use these programs. But of course, the federal government set them up in the first place. And they wanted to do that to incentivize people to take an active role in healthcare and to practice wellness and do things on a preventative basis. So then the really critical question is, okay, if we're going to expand these to include dietary supplements, how would the inclusion of these additional products in the program affect a consumer's decision on how much they use the HSA, FSA, how much would they put aside, and how much will that affect tax revenue? About 10 years ago, there was a piece of legislation that was looking to include dietary supplements. And the Congressional Budget Office did a score for that bill on what it would cost. And it came back with really high numbers that the industry looks at, and there's no way it really would cause that much money to be diverted from the taxable income into pre-tax money. So we've been battling against that ever since. So there are these two kind of inconvenient truths about what this would cost the country, but there are responses for both. So the first one is that many people who are currently eligible for FSAs or HSAs simply don't use them for whatever reason. They choose not to put their money in, and so the question is, if we suddenly allowed supplements, daily multivitamins and omega-3s and things like that, probiotics to be covered, would consumers suddenly rush into the HSA, FSA market and say, oh, well, let's all now go out and open new accounts because we can use it for vitamins? And the second one is that, many people who have HSAs and FSAs, they don't max out their contributions. So, there is a limit now. It's about $3,000 every year that you can put into an FSA. And yet most people don't even put anything near that much into their accounts. And we'll get a little bit more into this, but the data seems to suggest that consumers are making the decision about how much to put into their HSAs and FSAs, not based on what is the maximum or even what they would truly need for healthcare expenditures. It's really much more based on what can they afford to have taken out of their take-home paycheck every 2 weeks and still be able to, put gas in the car and take the family out to dinner on Friday night. And if that extra $50 a pay period is coming out, they say, you know what, maybe I can only put 30 in, or I can only put $20 in per pay period. So it's not really being driven by what they think they will spend. And the fact that so much of that gets left at the end of the year and they end up forfeiting it is further example that they're not making smart calculuses on how much to put away based on what they'll spend. It's really based on what they can afford to lose. One of the big myths about HSAs and FSAs is that these are basically just tax shelters for rich people. They're the only people who use these things and they put money away to avoid paying taxes. Actually, that has shown not to be true. And you can see from the graph that's up there, when you look at who uses HSAs and FSAs, 78% of the people who have one of these programs make less than $100,000 a year. And so you can see that, once you get over 100,000, collectively, all those little bars add up to about 12, 14%. But the vast majority of people are below the $100,000 mark, which again indicates that these are really tools of the middle class to help them incentivize wellness behaviors, which is what we want it to do. It is not simply a tool of rich people. And the other thing is, when we look at over the last 10 years, how much people have been putting away in their HSAs, that number has been relatively flat. And so you can see, and we're going to come back to this in a minute, but just remember that, so despite everything that's been going on in the world over the last 10 years, people are really putting a little bit less in HSAs and FSAs today than they were 10 years ago. So again, we're trying to figure out what would the impact be on the federal government if dietary supplements were included. And a good model of what might happen is to look at what I call the saga of OTCs. As Kazra mentioned in his introduction, I started my career in the FDA world working for the over-the-counter drug industry, and then moved over to supplements about 20 years ago. But I remember back in 2003, over-the-counter medicine was not allowed to be used in an HSA or FSA. And in 2023, the internal revenue by regulation, not by a change in the law, but by regulation, decided that it would allow over-the-counter medicine to be included. And so it was included. You could use your HSA and FSA for things like Advil and Claritin and Pepto-Bismol up until 2010. And then in the passage of the Affordable Care Act in 2010, it was removed. And again, a long story as to why that happened. They were trying to find money to justify some of the expenses of the ACA. And so they said, well, if we take this away, we will generate revenue for the Treasury, and that will allow us to pay for other parts of the Affordable Care Act. But then starting in 2010, over-the-counter medicine was not allowed to be used in your HSA FSA until 2020. And during the pandemic, the CARES Act was enacted by Congress, and they restored the eligibility for OTCs. And they also added another category that would be an eligible medical expense, which was feminine hygiene products. So they are now allowed to be used, to be purchased on a pre-tax basis. So, given all of that, think back to that graph on the previous slide where there really wasn't much change. And so, when you look back, this is another version of that slide, looking at how much was being put away. And yet the addition, subtraction, and then, adding back in OTCs really seemed to have very little effect on what consumers were doing, which further illustrates that this notion that adding dietary supplements to the mix is somehow going to bankrupt the Treasury because people are now going to rush out to put millions and millions of dollars into their FSAs because they can buy multivitamins. It's just simply not backed up by the case study of over-the-counter medicine or even feminine hygiene products. You would have thought that maybe there would be this drastic increase between 2019 and 2022 once these products were eligible. And in fact, there just wasn't. So, we've also done a lot of consumer surveys to find out, is this something that consumers would use? Would they find it useful? Would it help the industry if these products were available? And what we found out is that 78% of people who have one of these accounts say that they would like to be able to use their FSA, HSA money to purchase supplements, that it would incentivize them to use them in that way. But 66% of those people said they would not put any additional dollars into the account because of the expansion. So you do have some people who say, if I can use my FSA for multivitamins and probiotics, yes, I would put a little bit more in. But the majority of people say no, which again underscores that notion that people are making these decisions not based on what is an eligible expense, but really what they can afford to lose in their take-home pay. So now I'm going to move just a little bit to a separate issue, but you'll see how it all ties in a minute. We've also looked at whether dietary supplements can have an impact for the healthcare system. Can they save the healthcare system money? And you remember that, some of the biggest drivers in the healthcare system are Medicaid, Medicare, and VA benefits. So if you are saving money for the healthcare system, you're not only saving it for everybody, but specifically for the government in those programs where they are paying the bill, they can save money from the use of supplements. So we embarked on a study called Supplements to Savings, where we looked at 9 different dietary supplement regimens for 6 different conditions. You'll see the first 4 were all looking at the effects of those nutrients for coronary artery disease. But we also looked at, for instance, calcium, vitamin D for falls and fractures from osteoporosis. We looked at lutein, zeaxanthin, vitamin B, probiotics, and choline for very specific conditions. And we selected those conditions because for these 9 regimens, there is very clear data that the regular use of these supplements can help to reduce very specific manifestations of the condition. So for instance, there is very good evidence that using calcium and vitamin D among postmenopausal women, that you can have about an 18% reduction in falls and fractures from osteoporosis. So then the question is, well, what does that cost the healthcare system? We looked at emergency room data. We looked at hospital data to figure out what those incidents cost the system. and then apply the model that if you can reduce that by 18%, how can you save money to the system? And so again, these 9 regimens we looked at for very specific conditions, and we found that there were really some very large savings that can be made from the use of these products. But then we looked at how few people are using them today and where we're leaving money on the table. And what you can find is that there are, over the 9-year period, 2022 to 2030, there are hundreds of billions of dollars in potential savings to the healthcare system if people who are in these heightened groups that would benefit from the use of supplements were using them. And so I think that is also important part of our story, that as we're talking about, whether the use of dietary supplements through FSAs and HSAs is costing the Treasury some money because they're losing out on some tax dollars, we also have to then think about what is the benefit that the government, as the largest payer of healthcare, what are some of the benefits that it would be getting from the use of these products if there were incentives for people to use them. And again, this is just another infographic from our website that describes some of the healthcare savings. If you're interested in this, I encourage you to visit our website. I think I provided a copy of the deck, and so you're welcome to circulate that to the group. But if you want to look more information around this, I think there's a lot more information on our site about the outcomes of the study. So then jumping back to how all of this affects HSAs and FSAs, there are 2 bills in Congress right now. One is in the House. It's on a bipartisan basis that would simply say, a dietary supplement as defined in the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act is an allowable medical expense for purposes of the IRS. There's also a Senate bill. Right now, it only has a Republican sponsor, and it's a little bit more narrow because if you see there in the fine print, it only allows dietary supplements that make structure function claims to be covered. We think that's a mistake, because if you limit this only to structure function claims, a lot of the traditional vitamin and mineral products don't carry a structure function claim on their label at all. So, for instance, if you go to your drugstore to look for vitamin C, it may not tout the benefits of vitamin C on the label because consumers already know the benefits of vitamin C. Same is true with vitamin D or say magnesium. It may simply have a label that identifies, what's in the product and has a supplement facts box, but it lacks a structure function claim. Conversely, some of the problems that we find most problematic in the industry, so some of the products that make crazy claims for sexual enhancement or, lose weight, sit on your couch and pop a pill and the pounds will drop off. Those kinds of products are making structure function claims. They may not be able to support them, but they are making structure function claims. So, if you went back to this piece of legislation that limited you to products making structure function claims, what you would be doing is including a lot of products that you don't want to cover and excluding some of the traditional vitamins and minerals that you would want to cover. And so that's why we're putting most of our effort behind the House bill, which actually, includes all dietary supplements, because we think if it carries a supplement facts label, that's probably the best way for retailers to implement something like this. So I'll wrap up now. Next steps. As a result of all of our work, we have convinced the Joint Tax Committee in Congress and the Congressional Budget Office to go back and do a new score of the bill that takes into account all of this data that we've showed around consumer behavior. We are actively working to build co-sponsors to the House bill, and I think we are up now to over 10 co-sponsors. And again, we're working to make sure that it stays bipartisan. So if we're adding Republicans, we're trying to add Democrats at the same time to show the bipartisan support for the bill. We're trying to bring that Senate bill into conformity with the House version so that it covers all products that carry the supplement facts label. And we're trying to raise visibility on Capitol Hill anywhere we can about the bill, as well as the benefits of supplements and, touting our cost savings study to show that dietary supplements can actually have a beneficial effect on the cost of healthcare in this country. And there are lots of ways for this group to help. Any of your member organizations can join us in supporting this bill, talking to your members of Congress to get them to co-sponsor it, to join the Dietary Supplement Caucus. Lots of ways that they can help. And I'd be glad to talk to you either today or individually about some of the things that you can do. So why does it matter? I think, first of all, getting dietary supplements recognized as a medical expense will give consumers more access to the products, and it makes them more affordable if they can use pre-tax money to purchase them. It also creates parity for supplements with so many other things that are already covered under the programs that are already recognized as medical expenses. And it officially recognizes, I think, by calling them, qualified medical expenses, it recognizes that supplements do make a contribution to the healthcare system in keeping people healthy in the first place. And I think if we do all of that, we give consumers even more confidence then that their supplement regimens are helping to promote their own healthcare. So I will stop sharing. I'm sorry if I ran a little over, but I'm happy to take your questions.
Steve, I want to say that that was an excellent presentation and I learned a lot. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Mickey.
Steve, this is Margaret Chesney. It's
Yes, I
wonderful
saw
to
you
see
earlier. Nice to see you.
It was years ago when I was at NCCIH and I was invited to speak, or I don't know how it happened, Steve, you remember, and there was such pressure on me because the NIH didn't want me to speak to Steve Mister. And, so I used every charm I had to explain to Stephen Strauss that this is what we do. We talk, we get engaged, we see where there's a match. And I ended up speaking. And then actually, there was all this, there's a lot of red tape, and I won't go into detail on this, but in dealing, and I dealt very closely with the Office of Dietary Supplements at NIH. We were like partners. But we were, grants were coming in, talking about parsley and things that weren't necessary dietary supplements. And we didn't have any control. And it was really in talking with Steve and people in the industry and getting information from them that gave me the courage to go to Stephen Strauss and say, rather than just have these grants reviewed that we're talking about potential dietary supplements or doing studies with those, having them reviewed by scientists like myself, who aren't like the people that work with Steve, we needed to get a whole new study section that would review those entities, any grants coming in like that, rather than not fund them. Let's find the ones that are of value and get them funded. And so we actually created a board so that there was a major shift in what we were funding at NCCIH. So it's wonderful to hear how you're moving ahead. And I hope my little tiny bit of time trying to straighten out was just a lot of, there are a lot of walls that people build between their organizations that just sort of keep knowledge out, as opposed to being something that friends can climb over and share ideas. So when I saw this is going to be on the agenda, I just wanted to say thank you. And he's terrific. The people that he works with, and actually you could say something about what you do when you find supplements that are being advertised that are not quality, because you play a major, and that's what I actually told the people at NIH, that you are really providing a tremendous service along those lines. I don't know if you want to add something on that.
Well, yeah, thank you. I will say it's our member companies that make these decisions and directives. We're simply the staff that implements it. But when I hear about the people who malign the supplement industry, the major companies who are in this industry today, they don't want the bad actors in there any more than the doctors do. I mean, it's not good for the supplement industry when we find that there are products that have contaminated ingredients in them, or some athlete says, oh, well, my supplement was tainted and that's why I tested positive for drugs. So the responsible industry does a lot to try to, clean up the problems. Now, we don't, as I often say, we don't have guns and badges like the FDA potentially does. So basically, we have to do things more with a carrot than we do with a stick. But we do lots of things to try to, nudge companies to do the right thing. Margaret, you're referencing some of the work we've done with the Better Business Bureau, where we had a long-term program to challenge advertising that we thought was misleading to consumers. We regularly write to FDA and turn over, potential products that we think are not legitimate. I just wrote one of those last week on products that are not supplements, but that they carry a supplement facts label, and somebody needs to go after those companies and say, what you're selling is not a dietary supplement. You cannot put this label on it because it tells consumers that it's a supplement when it's not. So yes, there's a lot that we're doing. Christine, I think you had a question.
Yeah. Hi, Steve. Thank you so much. What a great presentation. Really, really informative. Even I learned a few things about my own health savings account. So thank you for that. My question, I'm a yoga therapist. I work with Alyssa a lot. And so I have a two-part question. One is, how optimistic are you about these bills getting passed? And following from that, what kind of precedent does it set for the rest of us? Because, when you look at those studies from, I think they were from NIH, but they're always on the CDC website about the use of complementary and integrative health modalities. Supplements is always number one. But then you have all this other stuff following: chiropractic, massage, acupuncture, meditation, yoga. And so what kind of precedent is it going to set? What, how hopeful do you feel?
Yeah. Well, so I'll take the first question first. So I don't expect anything's going to happen this year. And so it's an election year. It's incredibly partisan on the Hill. Nothing is passing except things that absolutely have to pass. But we have expected that. We're much more optimistic about next year. Regardless of which parties end up winning the presidential race in the House and the Senate, there are some major tax laws that are going to sunset next year and have to be reauthorized. And neither party wants those provisions to go away entirely. They may fight about what's around the margins on them, but they want those tax laws to be reauthorized. So we know there's going to be some legislation next year that is opening up the IRS code. I'm getting into sort of Washington speak now, but we're always looking for what is the Christmas tree that we can hang our provision on. A little tiny bill like this is very unlikely to get all the way through the system on its own and end up on the president's desk. But much more likely is you start socializing it, you build interest in it, you get some momentum behind it, and then you find a larger bill that is opening up that same provision of the code, and you try to jump on as a rider, and then you get on the bill, and then the bill gets too big for anybody to oppose, and that's how you get passed. So with these pieces of tax law that have to be reauthorized, we know there will be several tax bills next year, and we think that if we socialize it enough this year and get people talking about it, there's a way to get on that legislation and then ride it through when the bills have to pass. We do the same thing when it comes to FDA. When there are things that we want to change at FDA, you find something else that's opening the Food, Drug, Cosmetic Act, and you jump on it and try to ride that as long as you can. And then the other question you had was around precedent. I think it does set precedent. I think they've already started to expand qualified medical expenses when they passed the CARES Act, and they allowed OTCs back in, and they allowed feminine hygiene products in. I think if we get in, it again says, hey, medical expenses go beyond just traditional doctor visits and copays and prescription copays and things like that. There are lots of other modalities that people use to benefit their overall health. And I think it does set a precedent for expanding it in other ways.
Very good. Any other questions for Steve? Steve,
Mike, you have the deck.
I did have a question.
Oh,
I
yeah.
Hey, Steve, it's good to see you again, Beth Clay.
Oh,
Long
yeah,
time.
hi.
Your perspectives on, I mean, we still have a couple of antagonists on the Hill, Senator Durbin for one. And you do have some negative legislation out there. How is that, that's not likely to move, is it? Any specifics that we all need to know about?
Well, here, why don't I kind of throw a grenade into the conversation? I don't believe Senator Durbin is the antagonist to the industry that he is being made out to be. Now, that's not to say we don't have some opponents on the Hill. We do have some members of Congress, both in the House and the Senate, who are very anti-supplement. I think Durbin is trying to walk a middle ground, so I don't look at him as always the opposition.
Okay.
But that's not to say that we don't have others like Senator Blumenthal and over in the House, what's her name?
Is it Andy Harris?
Andy Harris used to be a friend of ours because he's a doctor himself and he used some supplements. So I think I put him more on the friend category than the opposition. But to answer your larger question, there are some things that are moving on the Hill that are not always good for the industry. I don't see any of those passing this year for the same reason none of our stuff is passing. It's just those kinds of things have very little chance in the very highly charged environment that we're in. Although I will maybe surprise you, Beth, one of the things that you may be thinking of as antagonistic to the industry is this registry idea. And CRN is actually a big supporter of a dietary supplement label registry. It is not pre-market approval. It is being scapegoated as if it is pre-market approval. There are multiple protections in the bill that say that this cannot be used as a way for FDA to pre-market review dietary supplements. It is simply a registry of labels. And at CRN, we believe that FDA should know the universe of products that it's supposed to be regulating. And right now it doesn't have that ability to see into the market. And what this would do is say that every manufacturer, when you bring a product to market, on your way to go, you have to hand FDA a copy of that label so that they know that that product is out there being sold to American consumers.
So could you equate that to, what is it, the Red Book in medicine of all the pharmaceuticals or something like that? Was it a book, is a Red Book or something like that?
Yeah, it's a little similar to that. It's similar to that, but it has some differences. This would be this would be an online website, a database. The only information that's in the database would be the information that's on your label. So companies would have to, fill out a form, but it's basically what's on the label goes into the database, and it would allow FDA. So for instance, if we had a situation here in the US, like we recently had in Japan, where there was a tainted red yeast rice product, FDA could go into that database and say, I need to know every product that has red yeast rice in that product, and they would be able to pull up all of the manufacturers and alert them that there may be a recall. So, but again, I don't see that passing this year either because it is such a toxic environment right now on the Hill.
That is true. Well, it is good to see you.
You too,
thank
Beth.
you for giving your time today. This is very important.
Thank you, Beth. Michelle, I believe you have your hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, Steve. This was a really great presentation. And thank you so much for the work that you're doing on behalf of all of us. We really appreciate the efforts. Very effective, obviously. My question is about, you gave some specific case studies with regard to research that showed specific supplements have a positive health outcome. And there are more. But my question really is about evidence decision-making. Like, do you feel that that evidence base is sufficient? And if it was sufficient, is it going to be enough to move the opinions of people who maybe have more belief status than a knowledge kind of basis? But do you understand what I'm saying?
Well, the knowledge base is never sufficient. I mean, we should always be adding to it. We have some good data for some of our products. Other ingredients, we don't have a lot of data on them. And so the 9 regimens that we picked for our studies were ones that we very carefully chose because they have such a strong data set behind them that demonstrates benefit. But no, we need to do a lot more, even things like, the multivitamin. Recently, there have been some negative studies suggesting multivitamins don't lengthen your life, and therefore people should stop taking them. And what that overlooks is the fact that, most people are not taking a multivitamin so that they can live to be 100. They're taking a multivitamin to have, better health for whatever time that they have. And we know that multivitamins reduce cognitive decline as people age. It reduces the incidence of cancer. So we need to do more to look at the conditions that people care about. Again, I don't think they care if they add an extra 3 years to their life if they're in a nursing home for those 3 years. They want to be healthy as long as they can be, and that's where we should be putting our attentions.
Great, thank you. And then a follow-up question. There is, I think, a good deal of research addressing nutrition gaps that Americans have based on the current food supply. And is that part of the argument that you're bringing forward as well?
It is, and you're absolutely right. The NHANES data that looks at our dietary habits have shown for 30 years that people have gaps even among essential minerals and things like iron and vitamin D and vitamin E that we're simply not getting enough from our diets. And so, if we can encourage people to supplement and get them to a level of sufficiency, why wouldn't we do that? I get kind of frustrated when I hear some of the people that I will call the food first and only food first crowd that say, well, we should all be getting it from our diets. I think everybody agrees. If we could, we would. But most of us don't have a chef and a personal nutritionist that lives with us and cooks our meals for us every day. So the alternative is, do we provide supplements and encourage people with supplements to fill those nutrient gaps? Or do we simply say, as one of the former heads of the dietary guidelines about 15 years ago, you eat your food, and if you don't, well, then you should just live with insufficiency. I mean, that's not the approach that we should be taking.
I agree. Thank you for your answers.
And thank you, Steve. You've excuse me, you've been very generous with your time. I really appreciate it. We could probably do a subset, a research study here in Louisiana with our food and our dietary habits, and on the food first approach, and probably get a good case study of what not to do, because we're pretty good about that down here. It's interesting to hear you're involved in ASAE. Will you be in Cleveland in a few weeks?
Unfortunately, I will not be there
month?
this year. I usually go to the ASAE event, but I have a vacation scheduled at that time, so I'm not going to be in Cleveland. Can I just?
That's pretty. Oh, go ahead.
If I can just give you, a couple people have in the chat have asked to connect. My email address is smister, first initial, last name, at crnusa.org. And so if you would like to connect with me, please email me and I'd be happy to follow up with you and get you more information. smister@crnusa.org.